Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for today's session where we will discuss a systemic culture of safety and how it can help you mitigate risk in your field operations. My name is Scott Shemwell, and I will be facilitating this discussion for the next 30-40 minutes or so. First of all, a little bit about myself and our company. The Rapid Response Institute has a focus on helping our clients achieve organizational agility, resiliency, and sustainability. We focus on areas where we can help clients deal with volatile markets such as we see today in oil and gas, and issues that are very challenging, particularly for the heavy industrial sector. We make extensive use of information technology, which you'll see in some of our discussions today. As for myself, primarily my career has been in upstream oil and gas. I have served at the executive level for large companies such as Halliburton and for smaller companies in the energy services space, and I've generated a great deal of income for companies that I've worked for selling technology to petroleum industry. There's a number of speeches that we'll talk about a little bit later towards the end, and books that I've written, and you see the two websites, one for the Rapid Response Institute and the second one, ORS 360, for a spin-out software product that we have, which we'll mention briefly later in this discussion. A bit of a disclaimer. These discussion points are my personal opinion and not the view of the Rapid Response Institute or any other affiliation that we have. As you see on the bottom, much of the material is focused on what goes on in the United States of America. I physically reside in Houston, Texas, although I've traveled the world, and I've seen these issues being addressed globally with similar technology and similar regulations. So much of what we say today, while it does have a U.S.-centric approach to it, I think will be valuable for those of you that are not in the United States. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we got to this point. We'll define systemic risk, talk a little bit about operations management and the technology enablers, and then we'll move into discussions around change management and how we move from where we are today to getting us on that road to operational excellence. So these are the several bullets that we'll cover, and hopefully, as I said, at the end of the day, we'll walk away from here with some specific actionable information. I'm sure most of you know that the oil and gas value chain consists of the upstream exploration and production, or the mineral extraction process, midstream, or the transportation of that crude into the refining and petrochemical sectors. As I said, my background is mostly oil and gas, although we have done some work with other industries as well. And much of what you see today applies to any industry where there is critical infrastructure at place, such as you see in the oil and gas sector. Most of you are aware that over 6 years ago, the BP Macondo, also known as the Deepwater Horizon incident, was a very significant event. The impact on the United States were up to 19,000 jobs lost, $1.1 billion in lost wages, lost taxes for the various federal and state governments, and BP, a staggering loss of several billions of dollars, which is still unfolding. Part of what happened here is that this set the stage for a traumatic change in the way the industry does business. It's an inflection point from a standpoint of safety and the approach that we take, because it's no longer just bet your company, you can bet your career and bet your life. So we'll talk a little bit about the reforms that took place, how they apply to the global industry, and how to deal with them and actually capitalize on them for a competitive advantage. So you've all heard the statement, Houston, we have a problem, from Apollo 13. I am in Houston, as I mentioned, and much of the industry is located here. So Houston does have a centricity for the oil and gas sector. The problem we have is societal, and these are legitimate concerns. No one wants to have this kind of activity in their backyard and their children at risk from poisonous gases or cancer. And it's not just a poor perception or misunderstanding, and it's not only in the United States of America. It is applicable everywhere. Moreover, it's political. And whether in the United States you're a Democrat or a Republican, or whether you're at the federal or state or local level, All these issues are the things that we care about in the fact that we want to have a safe and environmentally friendly society. This is an engineering process. It's systemic and complex, and we'll talk about systemic a little bit further and discuss what it is. It extends across the supply chain. It is not just the problem of the oil and gas company or the operator or the large energy services company or the drilling contractor. It applies all the way down to the smallest companies that may make up your supply chain. By one account, in this particular sector, some 90% of the people that are on a facility, whether it's a refinery or an offshore facility, are contractors. And so now we're very much in a bet your company situation, as we have seen from the results of the Macondo and the near bankruptcy of one of the largest companies in the world. So one of the things that's interesting to try and understand is, what is an operator trying to accomplish? What is an oil and gas company all about? Well, we hear, for those of us in technology, we hear about the digital oil field, remote operations, lean manufacturing, run the oil field like a factory, optimize reservoir or the reserves, which is the value to the operator, achieve operational excellence, and oh, by the way, we need to make money. Well, I would argue a slightly different situation. The market realities, and this chart is taken from November 2008, similar to what we're seeing today, where the precipitous price drop has had a major impact on the industry. The other issue we have is in the reservoir itself. From this particular slide, which was developed as a result of the conversation I had with the chief technology officer of one of the largest oil companies probably about 20 years ago, that in order for a field to remain profitable, we've got to drive down cost faster than the production decline curve. And as you know, the mineral extraction process, the amount of oil we have today or the amount of coal we have today is more than we're going to have tomorrow and next year and so forth and so on. So we need to drive down our costs. So these are a couple of the realities that our customers are facing. And when they say they want to run remote operations or run the field as a factory, they are working against these two constraints or these two critical issues that they have. So what they're really trying to do is maximize shareholder value and to create an agile, resilient, and sustainable enterprise. What's not in this slide, but is in other presentations that we've made, is that according to the consulting company McKinsey, some 30% of the value of the asset can be unlocked through operational excellence. And what we're talking about today with systemic culture of safety and operational excellence can help release that. That's a substantial amount of value that is available just by running your business better than you are today. So what happened after 2010? As I mentioned, Macondo was a seminal event and really changed the way things are done for this industry. We talked about systemic risk management. That is different than occupational risk. All of us are familiar with hard hats, steel-toed shoes, tie up if you're 6 foot up, goggles, etc. What we're really looking at, though, is the human, the machine, the process, and the environmental interface. All those things work together. It's more than just a fault tree analysis or other engineering assessments. And as you might expect, the supply chain are the weakest points in any linkage. It is the best perspective. It is not simplistic, and it doesn't lend itself to many of the slogans such as you see in the sign. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that safety shouldn't be first and that we all need to be careful about the occupational safety components. Systemic risk is occupational risk plus the system, the human, the machine, the process, and the environment that we're all working in. It's the most viable approach in my opinion. It's a combination of real-time systems, human training. You've probably heard about human factors. In the old days, we would call that ergonomics, and how we structure the man-machine interface. And it's also behavioral economics. We are all incented to do things. We get bonuses. We want to finish the job early and go home. We all have a behavioral component to our economic aspect behavior. And let me phrase that. We all are economic entities, and we base our behavior accordingly. So all of these things come into play, and as you might expect, this is a very complicated environment and does not lend itself to simplistic approaches. You'll see the picture of the space shuttle is a classic case of one of the most complicated machines ever developed, and there were 2 instances, as you all probably know, where those systems failed. Typically today, an oil and gas company has developed and used an operations management system. Those of you that are familiar with nuclear power may see that as a safety management system as well. And they're typically 8 to 12 different components. This is actually taken from one of the large oil companies. Leadership, the organization, risk management, our processes and procedures, the asset themselves. How do we optimize performance? Oh, by the way, if we fail in some of these areas and lose our privilege to operate, then the company itself is at risk. And of course, we have to report results. We have to be able to measure and provide feedback to these other sections so we know how to do this. Now, we're not going to go through all this today. You can see the kinds of things that you've got to do in here. Process safety, item 3.3 is important. Security, including cybersecurity these days. Document control, control of the work, etc., etc. All of these things make sense. These are the kinds of things that we have to do in order to run the business better. Having said that, we don't always do this every day in our daily work. Shortcuts are taken, some steps are overlooked, and people try to do the best they can, and I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we're not all trying to do the best we can, but sometimes the system that we're working in can challenge that. So one of the outputs of the Macondo was the requirements for the American Petroleum Institute Recommended Practices number 75, or API RP 75. Been around for a while, but now it's mandated. And as you can see in this particular slide, we take those components of the operations management system and map the SIMS requirements into it. Now, why do I do that? Because that's what the large oil companies are doing. If it makes sense, they're taking the requirements for these new regulatory systems and mapping them into the way they do business, much like they do with environmental and other regulatory bodies. You'll see a list of logos towards the bottom. I'm not a member of all of these organizations, but these are organizations that we have worked with and interfaced with and have a pretty good understanding of what the industry is trying to accomplish and how they're adapting this. Now, if you're not in the United States, the SIMS regulations may not apply directly, but others do. ISO 55000 around asset management is out, and people are adapting it. If you work for a large company with a global reach, and you're in Africa, you're in South America, you're in the Gulf of Mexico, you're in the North Sea, you're in Southeast Asia, companies all want to have similar processes and procedures on a global basis, and it makes sense because when you transfer from one place to another, you don't want to relearn everything. Now, to be sure, there are local requirements, there are language issues, there are cultural issues, and there certainly are local government regulatory issues that may differ somewhat, but in many ways there's not as much difference as sometimes it appears, because we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, and that's run a profitable business in a safe manner. I'm not going to spend much time on high reliability management. You probably have heard about it. If you haven't, you will hear more. It's really an approach towards looking at a process and saying, okay, things can fail. I'm not going to take the idea, okay, they can fail, but I can prevent them from failing. I don't want to simplify things. You look at a picture of that space shuttle. It's a very complicated environment. An offshore facility is very complicated. Refineries very complicated. They're more complicated than the human can deal with. But what we don't want to do is simplify it to one PowerPoint presentation where we lose the fidelity of the data and we don't have access to what we need to make good decisions. a focus on operation. We're sensitive to operations. The back office is important, the stock market's important, but operations is critical to the success of the entire company. A commitment to resilience. Things happen. I've used the example of the Ebola, I guess, virus that made its way to Dallas, Texas several years ago from Africa. And a lot of the conversations where it will get loose in the United States and it will be deadly. And to be sure, there were some consequences and some people lost their lives. But the medical system, including the government, the hospitals, the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, were all able to respond collectively at a systemic approach and did resolve that without it becoming the major concern that everybody thought it might be. We talk about under-specification structures. Most of you that are engineers know that you build with a 20% factor or more, because what we're really trying to do is say, okay, let's build stronger than we need. That gives us some buffer. It gives us the ability to respond and become resilient if we have some buffer built into it. So there's a book that you see on the right called High Reliability Management. I like it. I highly recommend it. It is written by sociologists as opposed to engineers, and it is a case study of the state of California electric grid. It's a very good read, a little bit technical, a little bit techie, maybe a little bit, can be a bit boring in places, but it's a lot of solid information in there, and I highly recommend it. So we're talking about, and the purpose of this organization, this meeting today, is to develop a robust safety culture. Well, if you look at the bullets on the left from leadership, that was the first line item in the operations management system. Problem identification, personal accountability, work processes, continuing learning, an environment for raising concerns. And this is the stop work authority, the authorization that anybody can stop work for any reason and there won't be any ramifications. This tracks back to the high reliability and a focus on resilience and operations. Communications, effective communications. Now, cultural issues, language issues, but the difference between an employee of an operator and an employee of a service company or drilling contractor can be different language, different nomenclature, and the like. Trust. We need to trust each other. An inquiring attitude. Always poking around, trying to see what's going on, looking for the best. And I like the definition on the left because we can all relate to healthcare. In a culture of safety, we're focused on getting the work done. We don't want to worry about reporting. There's no room for pointing fingers. Not my responsibility. We'll file a report and be done with it. You know, nobody wants to go into the operating room with people that have that attitude, and I don't think they do. I think people in the medical community have adapted this culture of safety, and it works real well. The bullet on the bottom, since each organization has a culture of safety, there are thousands of cultures of safety. If you think about organizational culture, it's a source of pride. It's who we are. It's how we do our business. It gives us that enthusiasm to go to work, and we're real proud of it. Now, if you layer this culture of safety on top of the organization culture, it will be different for a large oil company than a small engineering company. It will be different for somebody in Brazil than somebody in the United States. It will be different from people who are in offices in London versus people that are on the rigs in the North Sea. So it's not a bad thing, but it is to recognize that there are cultures of safety out there, not just a single culture of safety. When so many talk about what is a culture of safety, and you see someone like myself with a set of slides that looks like this, the reality is there are thousands of cultures of safety. Talk a little bit about some of the technology that can be used to help manage operations. We've done a lot of checklists. In some situations they work, and operations that we're talking about, I don't think they do. We have developed our ORS 360, which is an operations management system. It's a cloud mobility enabled with an automatic audit. We built it to ISO standards, and you can see that it's useful in tablets. If you look at the graphic on the right, you look at all those different companies, all those different networks that you're dealing with. You can't simply do simple risk management, high, medium, low anymore. It's just not sufficient in the complex environment that we work in. The other thing that we've got to do is work across the supply chain. If 90% of the people are in the field are contractors, all of those contractors are not inside your IT firewall. They're not under the domain of the chief information officer and his or her staff. They are outside the firewall, and in many cases using Excel spreadsheets to do the work. So the approach that we've taken is to build a system like this. There are others out there. We built it from the policy through the standards. Competency is a big deal. The knowledge, skills, and ability of the people in the field need to be validated and updated. When we talk about tools, it's everything from software to a wrench. And we move from high-level processes all the way down to subtasks. You'll note in the middle I use the word relationship. That's because we hand off from the operator to the service provider, and in many cases to subcontractors and subcontractors of them. So in this very complicated environment that we work in, we need a simple, easy-to-use tool that doesn't take the complexity out of the problem, but takes the complexity out of the human interface. So I'm asking you to make some changes, and I realize that. And of course, we all know people resist change. Well, I know you can't answer me, but how many people use that device today to make phone calls? We use those devices. So people do change. In the 1980s, the PC was started by Lotus 123. Many of you may not even know what that is anymore, but it was basically the early spreadsheet, and there were ones before that. Social mores have changed. Drinking and driving, seatbelts, smoking are come to mind, at least in the United States. So what we need is a carrot and a stick. If you drink and drive, you're going to go to jail. So that's the stick. If you don't, you get home safely. That's the carrot. And certainly with the smartphones, there's huge numbers of carrots and growing all the time as to why we would want to move away from the old style of communications. So I think people do change. They change when they have an incentive. What's in it for me? What's not for management, but what's in it for me? So we have taken a look at change management and have been doing it for a long time. And my colleague, Dutch Holland, who is an expert in this field, and unfortunately he had a car accident and passed away last year, have defined a three-step program. And you see bullet 3, it says specific to me. The book that you see is for the offshore industry. So when you open it up and read it, it's not about electric power. It's not about how the U.S. Navy does it. It's not about some generic change management consultant. It's how I would change if I'm in that business. We talked about cross-culture, the engagement between an engineer working for the oil company and an engineer working for the drilling contractor is a cross-cultural negotiation, as we've talked about. We've got an online game coming out pretty soon. You can manage resistance, and I said if you make things a carrot, but provide the appropriate stick, so that people do change. In many cases, it's my way or the highway is the final statement. We're going to change, and here's what's in it for you, and here's what's in it for me. But if you don't do it, you're no longer going to be a member of this team or this organization. So in order to do this, this is an iterative process, and it's supported by a number of tools. We've got to go through an awareness and education. We take small pilot or baby steps, then apply it widespread, and we keep the energy on to keep that change going until it becomes the new way of doing business. Now, with all the mergers and acquisitions, this is a continuing process, because if you bring in even a large organization, you will end up seeing different cultures merging or not merging, and it takes a lot of energy to do that. There's a lot of good practices, or some call it best practices, available from the industry as well as external. And particularly some of the work that's been done in aerospace is very useful. You see on the right, competency assurance. It's more than just training and record keeping. We've got to demonstrate and make sure that people in the field have the skill sets, the training, the tools, and the equipment, and the processes in place to do the work, and they must demonstrate it. There's a number of tools available. We offer some, others as well, and we'll talk about a self-assessment that was done here in a minute. But towards a culture of safety is a journey. It never ends. It's constantly undergoing change and transformation as the company changes and as the industry changes. It is the way we do business. I'm not going to spend much time on this because this is about 18 months old now. We did a quick assessment of 197 companies with Penwell, the large media company, and looked at engineering companies, oil companies, service companies, management, as well as engineering on a global basis. We had 197 people turn it in. And if you look at 21% reached a high level of maturity of the culture of safety, 36% were okay, and you could argue the last three probably need a lot of work. So that's some 50%. Now, you can say, okay, well, I'm up here in yellow or green. We're pretty good. We don't need to worry about it. If you hire companies or individuals that are coming in from the lower levels, by definition of the weakest link that we talked about, your maturity level for culture of safety is reduced to that lower level. Now, guys in the middle, they're probably okay, but certainly the bottom two need a lot of work. And what we're seeing is the operators are not hiring organizations that don't meet certain tests and don't demonstrate competency because they're not willing to take the risk, and the regulatory requirements are such that they can't anyway. So I thought this was kind of interesting. It's statistically relevant, and that I think it shows that at least in February 2015 there's a lot of work to do. I would argue, as I walk around this industry these days, particularly with the price of oil where it is and companies trying to save money and try to stay in business, that attention to some of this is probably not what it should be. We won't make the case today because of time, but in other sessions that we've done in other areas, we can make the case that there's a safety dividend that can be measured as real money to the bottom line. So there's a couple of critical issues that we're dealing with today, or three, I guess. Certainly the price of crude, large reductions in force, they continue. I'm of the opinion that the $50 US $50 price tag where we are right now, price point in the commodity, will not go up dramatically anytime soon. And some of that's technology, and some of that is the work processes are getting better. Cars are becoming more efficient. Air conditioning is more efficient. The Internet of Things is making things more efficient. Operational excellence is a focus. As I mentioned, that's where the value that you can take out, the 30%. However, some of the layoffs have lost some of the more senior folks that have the information, and not all that's been properly captured. There is pressure on management and technical staff, as we mentioned, to get the work done in a cost-effective way, and mergers and acquisitions have confused the process. However, culture of safety is mandatory. The public does not see the oil and gas industry in a good light. And there's no relief from the regulators. Regulators have told me, and I've been in that meeting, they said just because the price of oil's down doesn't mean that you cannot operate in a safe manner. You run the risk of not operating at all. And I would argue if you're in business today working against a $50 price point, you obviously are able to survive. Even if you're losing money, you're still in business, as opposed to having shut down or gone through some financial reorganization. So these are the major issues that I see that you all are facing, and I think that some of the tools we've talked about today are a way to do it. A couple of key trends. I mentioned API RP75. It's undergoing rewrite right now. There's a contractor management component, and as you might expect with all the information technology used today and the cyber issues that we've got, someone hacking into a smart grid in the electrical power area or a refinery or an offshore facility and doing damage would not be a good thing. Operations management systems are emerging. We've talked about one. We've talked about a little bit as the operators have the operations management systems today as opposed to standard operating procedures, the old SOP of the past. We continue to see technology development impacting, including water management, information technology, drilling technologies. Mergers and acquisitions are not slowing down at all. And big data can add a lot of value, and you're going to see more and more of that. 2015, last year, was one of the worst in a long time, and there was still $115 million in venture capital deals done. I talked to Reed Calhoun a couple of years ago, and I think he's right when he says the oil and gas industry is one of the last great industries to be fundamentally disrupted. I believe we're in the middle of that right now. And hopefully some of the things that we've talked about today can help you better deal with that particular environment. The challenge to the new generation, those of you who are millennials, as they say in the States, I'm a baby boomer. My generation is leaving the field, as they say. You have got to transform the oil and gas industry from one of a perception of dirty, dangerous environment to one where the products of the fossil fuels are part of the components in the basket of energy that drives the global economy. As I said at the beginning, most of what I've done in my career is oil and gas. I have engaged in other industries, and what we've talked about today, I think if you are in a critical infrastructure sector, such as transportation, power generation and distribution, nuclear power, medical, that all of these things matter to you just as much. The level of societal intolerance is high, and I think growing. There's no tolerance at all for people going to work and losing their loved ones, their sons and daughters, their wives or husband, because of an accident that was preventable. Those companies that don't take this to heart run the risk of losing their business, because if you can't get licensed to operate, there's no revenue stream. Cost of failures are high and real. We've talked about that. And as I mentioned, it's not just oil. And as the guys at Apollo 13 said in the movie, particularly, failure is not an option. So I appreciate your time today. There's some additional documentation. The books are written. They're all available on Amazon, I believe, and I think most of them are available at Kindle at a small point. We also have worked with Penn Energy for 5 years now, and our Governing Energy blog talks about issues such as we've talked about today, and there's more information available on our website. I want to thank you very much for your time, and certainly you can contact me for further information, and I wish you all the best.